In these days, Europe is standing at an historic crossroad that will determine its future demography, cultural and political character, its democratic nature, and the nature of its unity. In this plenary, we will examine the meaning of the growing political strength of parties of the far right in Europe and what this means for the tradition of tolerance in Europe, its implications for the Jewish communities, and for the democratic fabric of European society. To lead this panel, I'm happy to invite Mr. Dan Meridor, who has served Israeli governments as Cabinet Secretary, Justice Minister, Finance Minister, Intelligence Minister, and Deputy Prime Minister. He is currently the President of the Israel Council of Foreign Relations. Mr. Dan Meridor, please.
Good morning to everyone gathered here in Jerusalem. After the Second World War, for 5 or 6 decades, as a result of the horrors of this war, not only to us Jews, but all over the world, there was a very positive tendency towards democracy, human rights, rule of law, the collapse of the communist regime. Things look very, very promising. In recent years, I'm afraid one sees a backlash. The word democracy, the term human rights, rule of law, which were once the common base, sounds now as if they come from one side of the political map. You see a change in many parts of the world, including Europe, from democracy away or back to different directions, negative in nature. Think of Russia, Hungary, Poland, Turkey. Speaking of governments, think of parties who go to the very extreme right. Think of parties like the Freiheitliche Partei Österreich, Neue Alternative für Deutschland, the large support of Marine Le Pen in France, and on and on. The rise of extreme right sometimes is not directed specifically against Jews. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is against Muslims, but always against the other, maybe forgetting the lessons that the world has learned 70 or 80 years ago in Europe. What is our response to such developments that entail extreme right policies, ideologies, and values? Sometimes one asks, what should the Jewish people do? Sometimes one asks, what should Israel do? Are these different answers or the same? To me, we are a Jewish state, among other things, because we stand not only for the Jews, but for certain values the Jews have promoted for years, fighting for human rights, for minority rights, when we were, still are some places, minorities. How do we act now? What do we do with this strange, frightening dilemma, to some people a dilemma, of parties who hate the Jews and support Israel? What should the Israeli position be? Is it values or political expedience that should guide our decisions? To me, the answer is very clear. Values should have the upper hand here. We cannot forget what we stand for, what this country stands for, what the Zionist movement, a basically human rights movement that wants Jews to have equality like others, what do we stand for? But this is a topic that will be discussed here by very distinguished people, and we will start with welcoming here and I believe applauding to the man all of you know who became a hero of our generation. I wouldn't say it in Russian because it will look like a Lermontov story. Geroi нашего времени was a very bad man, or not decisive man. We have a very decisive man who really is a hero of our time, that won Israel Prize some days ago. Natan Sharanksy, please.
Thank you, Dan. Your Russian is not bad. Thank you. Dear friends, because we have to argue, I'll argue immediately with my friend Dan when he said that between values and interests, we have to choose values. I believe that our interests are where our values are. If we'll convince ourselves that there is opposition between values and interests, don't expect from our government in the end to defend our values against our interests. But because I believe that, in fact, our interests are exactly where our values are, that's why I suspect that we don't have disagreement with Dan. So, dear friends, I think that in order to clarify or to make it clear to ourselves why our position on this new phenomena of rising parties in Europe and in America, by the way, or forces who say that they love Israel, but they have problem with Jewish communities, why we must be clearly, absolutely clearly, against these forces. It's very important to make a comparison, to look back. In the beginning of this century, when we had our first global forums on anti-Semitism, our main challenge in those days was how to convince the world that those who say again and again how they love Jews, how they share values of human rights and freedom, but at the same time they cannot stand Israel, and how to convince people that not every criticism of Israel is legitimate, that when you're publishing the cartoon of Ariel Sharon eating Palestinian children and the blood is dropping from his mouth and it gets the prize of the best cartoon of the year, that's new anti-Semitism. How to convince the people that when Israel is condemned for violation of human rights in the United Nations more than all the dictators in the world for 10 years, it's not legitimate criticism, it's double standard, it's new anti-Semitism. And so on and so on. That was our struggle, and the main message of many, by the way, liberal leaders of Europe was that you are absolutely wrong. We all love Jewish people. We are absolutely against these awful things which happened in the Holocaust. But don't try to limit legitimate criticism of the state of Israel by saying that that's anti-Semitism. And I remember one of the intellectual leaders of Europe comes to Israel, speaks about his love to Jews, but then he says, but I was in Palestinian refugee camp, and that is Auschwitz of today, and Israel government is responsible for this Auschwitz. And I said, but that's exactly anti-Semitism, the demonization of Israel. And it was very difficult to convince people that that's not criticism of Israel, but that's anti-Semitism. And that's why we then, and I see here some of people who fought very hard those days, we were fighting and insisting that it will be accepted as part of international norm. I remember this 3D principle which I invented specifically. These words I invented, 3D principle, the legitimization, double standard, in order to give some criteria when this criticism turns into new anti-Semitism. And it was big success of all of us, when finally, for the first time, it was in Berlin resolution, I think 2004, with the support of Joschke Fischer, then foreign minister of Germany. And then it went to the other forums, this recognition that some forms of criticism of Israel, attempts to demonize Israel or to apply double standards to Israel, are the forms of new anti-Semitism. It became, step by step, something accepted. Then State Department accepted it, and then international bodies that yes, not every criticism of Israel should be accepted, the demonization of Israel, the legitimization of Israel, clear double standard towards Israel is a new antisemitism. And though this struggle, by the way, continues until this day, on every campus in the United States of America, the head of Jewish agency who have our shlichim on the campuses, I can say every day we have to fight with those on the left who are saying that because we love human rights and liberal values, and we see Jewish people as our partners, we hate Israel, which is a war criminal, and so on and so on. And we have to fight against it. Now, all this was happening when on the background was a big wave of fighting against identities. When Europe, there were strong forces, liberal forces in Europe, which were insisting that nationalism and religion are enemies of freedom and of peace, and that's why Israel, which insists to be Jewish state, is a problem. And I had many debates about it. That they were saying, we are trying to overcome this. We are trying to overcome this idea of the nations, of the borders, of religions. We want one world where there are no nations and religions, where there is nothing to die for, I quote John Lennon, of course. And you're there in the Middle East, you're insisting to have a national state. And that's why there is a problem. So that was the background. Now, there is like counterattack of the forces who say, enough of being cosmopolites. We want to bring back our national pride. We want to bring back our identity. Europe wants to be Christian again. Do they have right to believe in it? Of course. But when it crosses this love to nationalism, crosses this border and starts being against human rights, that is the question. And then there are forces which are like reaction on 20 years of fighting against identities. Now they start fighting for identities, for their national pride, for their religious tradition. And they say, you know, we love Israel. Look, Israel insists on being proud in the national state in spite of all. We love it. But this liberal Jewish community, which is against us all the time, which tries to keep us in this world of cosmopolites, who needs them? They are our opponents. They are voting against us. And they go and, in fact, say, Israel, we are with you. And at the same time, they are viewed as enemies or opponents or not welcome in body for local Jewish community. And it is so clear to me that we have to say to our friends on the right exactly what we are saying to our friends on the left. Those who say that they love Jewish people but hate Israel, they cannot be our friends. And those who say that they love Israel but hate Jewish people or Jewish community also are our enemies. And it's so simple, it seems so simple, but in fact, in real politics, it always becomes more complicated. Exactly as I heard from so many liberal Jews in America, how confused they are, and sometimes how difficult them. Yes, we have these organizations like Black Lives Matter. And we know that there is a lot of antisemitism inside these organizations. But what to do? They are fighting for very important values, and we have to be part of this. Or those who are saying, well, we know that Linda Sarsour is against Israel. She says that Zionists cannot be feminist. But it is so important to be part of this her feminist movement, so in spite of her anti-Israel position, we have to be with her. And every day we are fighting with these people and explaining that if you're a really liberal Jew, you cannot be against Zionism. You can be with us and not with the enemies of Zionism. But the same thing has to be also, at this moment, in some very difficult discussions in the government, I have to say, we have to be very clear there are forces which at this moment can look like politically very important for us. But if they are hostile to their Jewish community, their country, they cannot be our friends. And here it is very important that Israel and Israel government will coordinate their policy towards every political force in Sweden, in England, in Germany, in Austria, in Hungary, in Poland. There are, unfortunately, the list of the countries, European countries where these forces now rise. France, of course, it's, I think, more than 10. It is very important that in each of these cases, Israeli government will develop mutual strategy with the local Jewish community and will say what are our criteria, what are our demands to these forces, when we will accept them, when we will recognize them, when we will think that they are legitimate. And it must be clear that these demands have to include condemnation of the Nazi past, fight for the rights of Jewish community and all minority communities to have full, normal, democratic, liberal life in Europe, and many others. In every country, the conditions are different and criteria are different. But very important that Israel as a state and local Jewish community will speak in one voice. That is, after all, our obligation as a Jewish democratic state. Thank you.
Thank you, Natan, for your words, always inspiring, as your history from the days that we fought for you when you were still in jail. And all of us, or those of us who are not that young, remember Natan running on the crossing in Berlin from side to side, until I remember the day that both of us were ministers in the same government 20 years ago. The Jewish history in the story of one person. Kol hakavod. Now the organizers decided that one Israel Prize winner is not enough for you, so we have two. Let me invite now two discussants, two people who will talk with us, and you will hear them. Professor Shlomo Avineri, Israel Prize winner, professor at the Hebrew University for many years. All of you know of public experience and academic experience. He was, years ago, the Director General of the Foreign Ministry under Minister Yigal Allon. And he is still teaching and teacher of many of us in Israel. His voice is always heard with respect and with interest. Shlomo, please. And now I call upon Ariel Muzicant. Ariel Muzicant, who comes from Vienna, but speaks not only from Vienna. This is small for him. He's the Deputy President of the European Jewish Congress, and he will speak with us as well. Please, Ariel, join us here. So Shlomo will start to give you the opening statement. The floor is yours.
Thank you. What I'm going to say is going to be a little bit like a footnote to what Natan has said earlier about values and interests. But I want also to focus on an historical perspective. The fact that we see now in many European countries a return to a right-wing, racist set of values and policies has also to do with the way some 20 or 30 years ago we welcomed the fall and the disintegration of the Soviet bloc and of communism. And at that time, let me remind ourselves that we thought that everybody who was anti-communist was also a liberal and a Democrat. We thought that somebody like Solzhenitsyn, a great moral figure, a great courageous person, a wonderful writer, was a liberal and a Democrat because he was anti-communist. He was basically a Russian nationalist, and as we see it. And we see things like this today also in Hungary and Poland and other countries. So we have to make distinctions. And we have to realize that in many of those countries, what we see is a return to a political discourse which characterized Central and Eastern Europe, and also countries like France, in a way, in the 1930s, and in which racism and a very biological racism, which targeted Jews, but not only Jews, was part of the political discourse. And we see today a return to this kind of discourse. And again, I want to be very frank and discuss what we sometimes find uncomfortable as Jews and Israelis to realize. And this is the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room in Europe is that the reason for the ascendancy and the power of right-wing, racist, nationalist, populist parties has to do with the immigration crisis. And the immigration, most of it illegal and problematic, I'm not naive, is a Muslim, African, Arab immigration. And the fact that countries like Hungary and Poland have now governments which are anti-immigration, and anti-immigration is really their slogan, that Marine Le Pen has been relatively successful, despite the fact that at the end she failed, has to do with immigration, that Brexit has to do with immigration, and the racism primarily is not against Jews, it's against Muslims. And here we find ourselves as Jews and Israelis in a not very easy situation. Let me put it very frankly. Not everybody who likes Israel because of Israel or even because of Jews, or not even because of Israel. Many people support Israel because they think that we are fighting Islam. And we have to be, the enemy of my enemy. And we have to make a distinction. The fact that some people support Israel, we have to respond in a real political way. We have to take support where we can get it. In 1947-48, Israel got major support from the Soviet Union in the person of Stalin's decision, and we welcomed it, but nobody in Israel has said that Stalin is the greatest friend of the Jewish people, because we knew otherwise. And we have to make those distinctions. And therefore, it's not easy for Jewish communities in Europe, it's not easy for Israel to make those distinctions. That we are, again, as Jews, as people with humanistic values, in the prophetic tradition, we are against any form of racism, not just against anti-Semitism. That we have to condemn the kind of anti-Islamic and anti-Muslim rhetoric which is so powerful in Europe. It's not very easy because we are sometimes condemning people who are supporting Israel. But we have to make this distinction. The fight today in Europe against the extreme right is not just against anti-Semitism. It's against the racist philosophy. And let's be, again, very clear about it. Some of the people, and Marine Le Pen is an example, but there are people like this in Holland, certainly in Poland, in Hungary, and in other countries. The people who today are anti-Muslims and are against Muslim because they have a view that Islam is taking over Europe. I'm not naive. Europe has a problem with the Muslim and African and Arab immigration. But the idea that we are fighting not just against anti-Semitism, but against racism. And we have to find, not very easy, in the Muslim and Arab communities in Europe, allies. Not easy. We have to find allies because some of the people who are today anti-Muslims, their parents and their grandparents were the anti-Semites of the 1930s and 1940s. Let's not forget about it. So again, when an Israeli prime minister travels to countries like Hungary, on real political level, I perfectly understand that we have to take support when we get it. But this is not necessarily our fight. We, as Jews, as Israelis, as people who have been victims of racism, have to stand up against racism of all, whatever its source, despite the political difficulties. Easy, no. But just as in 1948, we got support with the Soviet Union without viewing Stalin as the greatest friend of the Jewish people. We have to make those the distinctions today, also in Europe, and if I may say so, also in the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shlomo. Now we'll hear Ariel Muzicant. Please, the floor is yours.
Many thanks for inviting me, and let me be a little bit critical of what we heard so far, but only in a slight distinction. I hate to be put into a box which is called left and right. I represent here the European Jewish Congress, who speaks for 1.5 million Jews in Europe, and this is according to figures which we usually coordinate with Professor de la Pergola. You can say there is more, you can say there is less, but there is more or less 1.5 million European Jews today living in Europe. And these Jews, differently to the Jews in America, would not like to be put in a box of liberals or left, because they are not. But what they are to a large extent survivors, second generation today, of the Holocaust. And living in countries such as Germany, Austria, France, and others, where the inventors of the Holocaust came from, means that we have a special responsibility, and we can't just live there and be quiet when people today, not 30, 40 years ago, start to discuss issues like the supremacy of the Aryans and the supremacy of the white race and other things. So, believe me, it's not a question of trying to just discuss anti-Semitism. It is a question of our self-determination as Jewish people living in Europe. If we lose this battle, we have no reason, no raison d'être to survive as Jews in Europe. And what is happening right now is that, and I'm saying this dramatically, some members of Israeli politics are pulling the carpet below under our feet, when they do not understand that fighting the extreme right in France, in Austria, in Germany, in other countries, in Poland, in Hungary. I saw the president of the Zentralrat here, I saw the president of Hungarian Jews here. They have been standing up and risking a lot by condemning certain positions of the extreme right, no matter if they are in government or not. Now, if the state of Israel, as I say in German, falls into our back and starts being friends with these people, while we tell them there is a red line which you do not cross, our position of keeping up the Jewish values is gone. The moment you do not understand that all our institutions, and Jews usually do not agree, right? Well, there was a unanimous decision of the World Jewish Congress, a unanimous decision of the European Jewish Congress, a unanimous decision of the Conference of European Rabbis. Natan Sharanksy said it, President Rivlin said it, etc., etc. Do not let them fool you. Do not let them tell you that because they now decided to be with Israel, they have changed their positions towards fundamental issues. And this is not just anti-Semitism. It is much more. And now I agree with you completely, Professor, that the physical danger of the Jews in Europe today comes much more from Islamists than it comes from the extreme right. But Jews have always had something like emotions or psychological feelings, how to explain that we still live in this continent of Europe, who murdered 6 million of our brothers and sisters. And the key element has to fight any type of extremism, from the left, from the right. And we are not doing this from a position of the left or the right. We are doing it from a Jewish position. Now, I have asked a member of the Viennese community to join me here and to show you a couple of pictures. And if I may, Dan, show them now. Erich, do me a favor, show the audience what is the reality in Austria, for example. Sometimes I say, and I don't want to be quoted, that anti-Semitism to a certain extent was invented in Austria. because people seem to forget that Lueger and Hitler and Eichmann and all the others were Austrians. Schönerer, who invented the anti-Semitic movement in Austria in the 19th century, was followed by hundreds and thousands and millions of Austrians. Now, the first extreme right party who came into government was in Austria, and right now we have it again. But what people do not know is when Jörg Haider, the leader of the first Freedom Party, at one moment saw that he can't go on with this, he split the party. And he called on the Jewish communities, even so we were not in direct contact with him, and said, I have split the party and I left all the Nazis behind. Now guess where all these Nazis are today? They are the backbone of the FPÖ. 45% of parliament members of the Freedom Party are members of neo-Nazi fraternities which until today do not accept Jews as members. Not that we want to be there, but they still have a statute which says no Jews are allowed. These fraternities still sing songs like Let's Kill the Seventh Million. And they sing them today, not 70 years ago. They march on May 8, the end of the Second World War, to commemorate the occupation of Austria. Today, not 70 years ago. They have Kaltenbrunner, the head of the Gestapo, and other Nazi big shots as heroes of their fraternities. And members of these fraternities are today ministers in Austria. And our Prime Minister of Israel has just discussed with the Chancellor of Austria the possibility to change the pattern which was agreed upon by the Prime Minister of Israel, not to have contacts with these ministers. So I'm asking, really, where are we? What is happening in Israel? Don't we see what is going on? These ministers need the hechsher of the Jews. And if they can't get the hechsher of the Jews in Europe, they want the hechsher of the Israeli government. So I'm really calling on our friends here, and I'm president of Keren Hayesod, so I'm not exactly an enemy of the state of Israel, to realize what is going on in Europe and not to be bought by simple realpolitik.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eric Nuller. I am a board member of the Jewish community of Vienna. We elected our new board, our small Knesset, in November, and 1 month later, a new government in Austria came into office, including the quite famous, let's say famous, party, the FPÖ, the Freedom Party of Austria. And I believe many or everybody here knows that as a community we had made it very clear that we don't want a normalization of the fact that there is such a power in government. We are not at war with the FPÖ, so we don't need peace with the FPÖ. We just don't want to normalize the fact that such a party is in government. And that for very good reasons, and I will go into detail. I was asked to keep it short, so I will go into detail in the history. This is the FPÖ, the icon. You see Heinz Christian Strache in the logo. The party was founded in 1956, and it was preceded by a party called the VDU. It's a Federation of Independents. This party was founded representing the interests of former members of the Nazi party, of the NSDAP, in Austria and Germany. It was also founded it supported the abolition of denazification laws that limited the political activities of former Nazi members. The first leader, the first chairman of this party was Anton Rheintaler. You see the picture of him here. He was a cabinet member, a minister of agriculture in the first Nazi government of Austria, also a member of the Reichstag, of the Third Reich Parliament, and later also SS Brigadeführer, SS officer. Now, this is history, one could say. When you leave the history behind, everybody can make tshuva, everybody can go into the future. The thing is, we see here, this is from 2016. You see a commemorative event held by one of the deputy chairman of the FPÖ, Manfred Heim-Buchner, commemorating also the founder, Anton Rheintaler. Now, I think this guy, also many of you know, Jörg Haider was a very popular leader of this party. The rise of the FPÖ started already in the 80s. Haider brought this party from 5% to 27% and the second largest in Austria. They entered government in 2000 and then they lost because the party splitted. Strache took over or was elected as party leader in 2005 and Haider left the party and he built or founded another party which was supposedly more liberal than the FPÖ. Today, the last elections in October in Austria, October 2017, the FPÖ gained 26% of the votes. Now, let's get back to the past. These are youth photos, youth pictures of the Vice Chancellor, Heinz-Christian Strache, HC Strache, in the late 80s and beginning of the 90s. These were paramilitary exercises in the Austrian forests. He was doing that with also convicted neo-Nazi activists. Now, short video. This was the premiere of a theater play that the topic was the participation of Austria in the Shoah. This is Heinz-Christian Strache. Well, I'll switch that. This is Strache showing a neo-Nazi salute. And this is history, I remind you, this is history. This is not Strache, this is not the Vice Chancellor that we see today. Today he speaks a totally different language and totally different appearance. Now, who's the FPÖ today? There are fraternities. Who are these academic fraternities? There are 34,000 members in Austria of such fraternities. 30,000 are, we say, nicht schlagend, not fencing. They don't fence. They are pro-Austrian and they are Catholic. 4,000, so a small minority, are German national and mostly anti-religious. These people, they are the backbone of the FPÖ. And I give you some numbers. In the era of Haider, 11% of the members of parliament of the FPÖ were German nationalist fraternity members. Today, it's 35% of the FPÖ members in parliament. And Strache has 6 deputies as a chairman, and 5 of them are fraternity members. Now, these fraternities, and I think Ari Muzicant already said that, you can say that they invented political or racial anti-Semitism in the 19th century. They have an Aryan clause. They had an Aryan clause, which is this: every honorable Aryan is able to, for satisfaction by this word. This is one part of the so-called Weidhofener Beschlüsse. It was renewed in 1994, and it's still in use in most of these fraternities today. In 2015, there was one fraternity or one fraternity member tried to get rid of it by this declaration: he wanted all of the German nationalist fraternities in Austria to subscribe this. It didn't work out. Nobody subscribed.
Es hat nach dem Krieg gezielten Mord gegeben, gezielte Vertreibung gegeben. Es sind nahezu ähnlich viele Menschen nach 1945 ums Leben gekommen als während des gesamten Zweiten Weltkrieges.
So this is the Vice Chancellor of Austria saying that after 1945, at least as many people were killed as during the war. Okay?
There is a magazine called Aula. This is clearly a FPÖ magazine, academic magazine, that, for example, here I brought you one example. It's 2 years ago, called Shoah Survivors of the concentration camp Mauthausen, located in today's Austria. Criminals, the survivors, yeah? Criminals, mass murderer, and a plague to the people after the liberation of this camp. The FPÖ did not react. There was a member of parliament of the FPÖ that was the attorney of this newspaper. Systematically, in this newspaper of the FPÖ, we find Holocaust is mentioned only with quotation marks. We read quite often about the world being Judaized. Very anti-Zionist propaganda, books, by the way, and this is also something that was mentioned. These far-right parties in Europe, and also the Austrian example, the FPÖ, they seem to be pro-Zionist, pro-Jewish now, but when you look into the basis, you find a lot of anti-Zionist propaganda. Now, I'll skip that. This is only about the activity in the past 10 years. Our Vice Chancellor, Hatze Strache, posted in August 2012 a caricature which is clearly anti-Semitic. You see the guy on the left, it's the banks. In the center you see the government, and on the right, das Volk means the people. The banks, when you zoom in, you see this, found on a Swiss, from Switzerland, a neo-Nazi portal. There's a lot of misconception going on, and I had some conversations with people on this conference as well, saying that he raised it. 24 days it was online, because 24 days after he posted it in August, the last comment was posted there. In fact, nobody from the FPÖ apologized, nobody distanced from this caricature, and it was not erased. I'll skip that, it's still online. Today. I checked this morning, maybe something changed in the past 2 hours. In recent speeches, we hear Strache and also other members of this parliament, of this party, measure us by the deeds, not by the history. There's no place for anti-Semites in the FPÖ. We will kick all anti-Semites out. Let's have a look. In 2017, in November, it was November 9th, the anniversary of the Leil Habdual, the so-called Kristallnacht. The Austrian parliament had a session, and here you see the then Chancellor Kern commemorating the Kristallnacht.
Das, was die Nazis so zynisch die Reichskristallnacht gesagt haben. Es war der erste Schritt zur Massenvernichtung, es waren Plünderungen, es waren Ausschreitungen, es gab 30 Tote. Und ich denke, uns ist es gerade in diesem heutigen Tag zu Recht ein Anliegen, hier zu erinnern und zu gedenken, weil die Art und Weise, wie wir mit unserer Geschichte umgehen, bestimmt.
Everybody applauded, beside of FPÖ members. Friends of Jews, friends of Israel, how's the stand towards the Shechita? FPÖ, this is the website of the FPÖ Lower Austria, which is the biggest district or state of Austria. You see the Schecht, nein danke, Schritta, no thank you. They are, let's come to 2018, this year. They're in these fraternities, they are very secretive. Really not a lot of things are coming out to public. It's Männerbund, how do you say Männerbund? It's only for men. You need to be there for 1 year. After 1 year, you need to fence, and you have the mensur, and then you have these cuts in the face. In 2018, something changed this year. A journalist in Austria uncovered songbooks that were used in fraternities. Here, this is Step on the Gas, you old Germans will manage the 7th million. This is the fraternity Germania. There was a police raid in the fraternity's clubhouse. They confiscated 19 songbooks and more material. The chairman, the second chairman of this fraternity is Udo Landbauer. He was also the top candidate for the FPÖ running for the election in February. Since taking office in December 2012, this is 3 months until now. 17, sorry. 3 months, we counted 19 anti-Semitic or neo-Nazi or racist incidents in the sphere of the FPÖ. I will skip here a few of them. Head of Minister's Office of the Minister of Infrastructure. The head of the office has a neo-Nazi past. There's a lot of members in the ministries, in the cabinets of ministers with neo-Nazi past, members of the German nationalist fraternities. In December 2017, a FPÖ politician used Nazi propaganda on Facebook. Here's another FPÖ politician who likes the Nazi band Division Germania. The Minister for Interior said he wants to concentrate migrants, asylum seekers in camps, which was commented very outrageous. There's swastika flags. These are examples of FPÖ politicians, also local politicians, only since December 2017. There's another case, the FPÖ in the government. We have the conservative ÖVP and we have the right-wing to far-right FPÖ. In Austria, you have in the universities, on the public universities, you have boards that the government is allowed to send in representatives. And the FPÖ nominated a bit too extreme members, so the ÖVP, the conservative party, rejected them. There was a posting of Untermensch Subhuman, FPÖ candidates for regional election, was a member of a neo-Nazi party that was forbidden in the 90s. He waved the flag at the rally in 2010, saying they're for racial purity. And then there's another FPÖ candidate for the local election in Herzogenburg in Niederösterreich, who was a fan of a Nazi band called Der Stürmer. This is the band, by the way.
Die griechische Neonazi-Band Der Stürmer hat.
Deputy mayor of Graz, the second largest town in Austria, held a speech at the far-right Congress. FPÖ chairman in Imst in Tirol sent out this. Missed since 1945, Adolf, Germany needs you. Then there's another fraternity called the Brunner Sudetia. One might think that after the first scandal of the Nazi songbooks that were found and the police raided this clubhouse, all of these fraternities clean their clubhouses. But this was not the case. Another songbook another songbook was found. And then a member of this fraternity and also FPÖ member said about his fraternity that we, the fraternity members, we were prosecuted during the Nazi era. Therefore, the IKG, the Israelitische Kultusgemeinde, Jewish community of Vienna, made a very clear stance because of out of a moral necessity, as well as other Jewish communities all around Europe and the State of Israel, to not have contacts with such a party. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this briefing. Thank you for briefing us, and we'll continue. Shlomo, Avineri wanted to add something. Please, Shlomo.
2 points, which I know are going to be not easy to make and possibly controversial. First of all, I'd like to, this is not controversial, to congratulate the organizers of this conference. And it's the 6th global conference combating anti-Semitism. So let me first of all congratulate all the organizers, the foreign ministry and the other groups, Jewish and Israeli, who are involved. Let me suggest that they consider that the next 7th Congress will be called the Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism and Racism, so that it is clear that we are viewing it not just from an ethnocentric Jewish perspective, that we have also a universal perspective which comes from our Jewish values, because we are against not just anti-Semitism, which is our interest, we are against racism in general because this is against Jewish values. So I suggest that we think about it. My second suggestion is that it's ex post facto. After the recent elections in September in Germany, when an anti-immigration party, Alternative für Deutschland, received 11%, the Israeli Prime Minister made a statement which criticized all extremism. I would have thought that as an Israeli Prime Minister, and this is about Germany, could have also made a little bit of a more sophisticated statement. Because he is not only the Prime Minister of the Jewish state, which he is, he's also the Prime Minister of all Israeli citizens. And 17% of Israeli citizens are Arabs. I would have very much thought that it would be also politically a smart position if the Prime Minister of Israel would say that as a Prime Minister of Israel, he condemns every racist policy and party, be it aimed against Jews and Arabs, because he is also the Prime Minister of Israeli Arab citizens. I hope the next time this will be considered. Thank you.
Let me say something about the last point of racism. You know, Israel is a democracy, as you know, and we're a very open democracy, and everybody can run for the Knesset. One exception we made in mid-80s. After there was a racist party elected in 1984, and the Supreme Court told us, I cannot rule that they cannot run because the law, the basic law, doesn't allow us to make such decision. In 1985, the Knesset, for the first and only time in our history, changed the basic law of the Knesset, adding the following: that a party that incites racism cannot run for election. It was met with very wide consensus, on which basis in 1988 the Knesset banned the party Kach of Meir Kahana, who was a Jewish racist, from running for the Knesset. Supreme Court, in a very remarkable decision, mainly written by a religious Jew called Professor Elon, Menachem Elon, spoke about racism and Judaism, why racism is the opposite of everything Judaism, Jewishness, Jewish values stand for, and why we do not allow racism to run for parliament in our country. Whether they have a majority or minority, they are outlawed. Not a simple decision, but I think a very right one. One can be liberal and conservative, or can be Haredi or secular, what can be pro-Palestinian state, against Palestinian state, what can be for socialist or capitalist, one cannot be a racist. This is a Jewish standing, it's a moral standing, it's a human standing. And there are two things here. We have seen here the Freiheitspartei Österreich. We have seen this very convincing expose and example. But there are two elements here, and both were mentioned here by my two colleagues here. One, our past as Jews in Europe. Until 100, 150 years ago, 90% of the Jews of the world lived in Europe. 10% in the Arab countries, in North Africa, and Babylon, and Syria, and so forth. And there were 16, 17 million Jews in Europe. Now, only 1.5 million left. Many ran away in time, America, South America, South Africa, Western Europe, partly Israel. Others were murdered by the Germans and their allies, and only a few remained. So our past is well connected, and the Zionist movement that was born in Europe was born, among other things, because of the racist anti-Semitism of Europe. So we cannot and should not neglect to think and abandon and forget our past. We are our past. And past, as Shakespeare once said, is the prologue for what will come. Now there's a big difference, of course, between the 1930s for Jews who live in Vienna, when my mother was born, and the Jews who live in Vienna now. The small difference is there is the state of Israel. And the Zionist answer is simple. But there is another element here. It's not our past. It's the objection to racism now, whether it's against Jews or immigrants or others. Those who call immigrants or those who seek asylum a cancer, shamefully an Israeli minister, cannot represent Jewish values. And Israel should stand for these values because of our past and because of our values today. It's not only a world of cynical cheshbon, cynical calculations, whether it's good for me now, bad for me now, somebody supports me. If we don't stand for those basic values, what are we? It's not about European Jews. It's about Israel. What country are we? And we expect our leadership, as it used to do, to stand very firm, not being naive, not being academically smart, but being morally right. Morally right means we stand against racism, and we cannot condone and look the other way when you hear parties like these, members of coalition in an important country in Europe. Now, having said that, I want to turn to you in the public, and I'll stand here so the light will not blind me. If there's anybody here who wants to ask a question of my colleagues here, we'll do that. Is there a mic for the people here? Yeah, please.
תודה רבה. Thank you very much. שמולי קלסטר, Vienna, Austria, die jüdische Atara Yehudi. One question to Erich. Can you name the sources? Can you make the sources of your presentation available to academians here? Simply the sources. Would it be fair to name the documentation archive of the Austrian resistance, for example?
Of course.
Okay.
Everything.
Okay, thanks.
Each source is open to public, just as I found it and I had it. It's all open.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.
Ari, one question.
Yeah, please.
Ari, we don't agree usually. We are like Putin and Navalny, but in this time I agree with Ari. But what would you do in 3 months or half a year or 2 years if Prime Minister Ayelet Shaked, for example, would ban this and say the FPÖ is kosher now? What would be your plan B?
Okay, Ariel, please.
It is not a coincidence that I was elected, and I'm one of the few elected members of the executive of the World Jewish Congress and the European Jewish Congress, and I'm also president of Kernheisort Austria, and I have a home here in Herzliya, Biturch. I've been considering leaving Austria a couple of times. If a red line is crossed in Austria, I will leave. If a red line is crossed in Israel, by a government of Israel elected democratically in Israel, I will denounce this as what it is, and I would then say what I have to say. But let me put it this way. The means have never, how do you say this in English? Der Zweck heiligt nicht die Mittel. The means never excuse.
Justify. Means don't justify the end.
I still believe in our values, and I think that on the long run, the government of the State of Israel, whoever the Israelis will elect, will understand that we have to convince the left and the center and the democratic parties in Europe to change their position and not to befriend with this, as we say in German, brauner Dreck. This is my position, and I'm not going to change it.
Yes, thank you. Please. Yes, there's the mic.
Thank you. I have one question.
Will you say who you are?
I'm from Ukrainian League Against Antisemitism. One question before, and in Vienna, have Straße Street Hitler? No. In Ukrainian, now have many street avenue, many monument. Who is men, who is leaders, pogroms, leaders many killers Jewish, and before, when Holocaust, and before Holocaust, and Petlura, Khmelnytsky, Shukhevich, Bandera, many, in every Ukrainian, we are born Simon Wiesenthal, now have many monuments, we have many Jewish, 90 years ago, go to United States, to Canada, to England, because Jewish pogroms, now is in Kiev. When you go from the train station to Central Synagogue to Chabad, speaking bus, Petlura Street, this is in many monuments, many streets in Kiev, in Ukrainian, and why Israel government support Ukrainian? Why American government, American Congress, Canada, European Union support Ukrainian government? Many years, money to Ukrainian government, who is glorification, who is killing Jews with politics. 3 years before Yushchenko, now Poroshenko, Groisman, before meetings President Rivlin, meetings Netanyahu, meetings in White House, in Congress, in Canada Parliament, Yushchenko, Groisman and Poroshenko, very meetings, and with who's glorification, killers, Jews, and Holocaust, and before Holocaust. Why support? Why
thank
you. Austria was speaking in Ukrainian, Baltic countries.
Thank you. You made a point where you were well heard by everybody. Yes, please. Yes, please.
My name is David Gaffin. I'm an ex-South African of Lithuanian origin. I'm not
all South African Jews come from Lithuania.
I'm not a refugee. I came here 40 years ago, and if you read Facebook or you're involved with the South African community, I would say that the South African Jewish community is in a possibly worse position than the Austrian community. Nobody is saying anything. Everybody is saying everything will be fine. You know, the rabbis before the Second World War, I'm not anti-religious, always said, that everything will be okay. In South Africa, it will not be okay, and the Jews will be the first one to suffer. The Africans are shouting, death to the Jews. Hitler's become a prominent persona in the community, and I come to this conference, and there's not one word about South African Jewry. I also want to comment about people from Austria. Why we are privileged to have an Israel after 2,300 years. Why don't you come here? Come to Israel.
Well, you might have heard that there is already a home in Herzliya, Pituach. I thought it's a Bituach in Herzliya, not Pituach. And Ariel will definitely be here in the end. Thank you very much for your question. Yes, please, my lady, there. Thank you. Just a minute. Have a mic and we'll hear you.
I've been living in Israel for 35 years. I'm from Australia. My father was a survivor of the Holocaust from Poland. Okay, so I'm coming from a background where I'm not left-wing, I'm not right-wing. I came to Israel because I saw what happened to my father's family. I realised that there was only one country for me to live in. However, when we talk about racism, and I don't consider myself to be racist whatsoever, I think we're completely ignoring what's actually going on in the world around us, and racism has come from something. And it's not a surprise, as we've seen over the past 20 years, like the Muslim immigration into Europe and all the terror that has come, mainly from the Muslims. Now, like what we see here in Israel, when you have terror, it creates fear, and we see that here in Israel. And it's also not by chance that Israel has become a lot more right-wing. So even someone like me, who I consider to be very central, I don't vote this party or that party, I live in a reality. And my reality is safety, that I want safety for my family and for people around me. Now, I can't discern who is a good Arab, who is not, who is the terrorist behind me. I fear. And I think this is what's happening all over Europe. It's certainly happening in Australia. They've had immigration from China, they've had immigration from Vietnam, Cambodia, and only now Australia has closed its borders because it can see what's happening in Europe and they don't want the problem there. So when we talk about racism, I think we have to look at the whole context of what's going on actually in Europe and what happened in America, and not look at and talk about racism in a total vacuum.
Thank you for your question, for your remark, it is. Please, go ahead.
A simple question, and I am certainly against racism. We're talking about countries that are racist. Why isn't there that same kind of talk about Abu Mazen, about his government being racist? And if the Kach party is considered racist, do you consider the Arab party also racist or not?
Let me tell you a personal story, which may relate to what you said here, sir. When I was a child, in my family, there was a boycott on all things German. We didn't buy anything German, we didn't hold anything German at home. And I remember as a child, I was not allowed, when I collected stamps, to collect stamps from Germany, because Germany did to the Jewish people something that is outside the scope of any other thing. And I remember as a child, I asked my father, why do you allow me to collect Arab stamps and not German stamps? It was 1955 or 56. I remember him, and he was an underground commander in the Irgun fighting the British, detained by them and fighting the Arabs. He said, you see, with the Arabs, we had a war. They tried to kill us, we tried to kill them, thank God we won. With the Germans, there was no war. They exterminated us. So I don't compare the tough fight we have with the Arabs, which thank God we won, thank God, thank our soldiers, with what the Germans did to us. So racism is a different scale altogether. Altogether. There is a huge fight on this land, and so far we have done marvelous things, and here we are. You sit here in Jerusalem because of the strength of our army and the strength of our people. This was a nation fighting a nation, and the just cause of Zionism won. I wouldn't make every fight like this between Israel and Egypt or Israel and Jordan, our neighbors now, a racist thing. Racism is something different. What the Germans did to us in Europe was racism. This is a different story. Don't compare everything to everything. It's not all the same. This is my personal note to what you said. All right, another question, please. I'll let the panelists answer. They will collect some remarks and they will do it. Dina, maybe you now. Professor Dina Porat. Ariel, you want to start with Austria, please?
If I may. Professor Porat, how can I not agree with you, but let's put it this way. There's been plenty of studies on anti-Semitism, and you are the head of the anti-Semitism center in Tel Aviv. You know very well. Anti-Semitism in general in Europe was diminishing, especially the old type, the right wing was diminishing. over the last 60 years. In Austria too, by the way, it exists everywhere. The problem with the Freedom Party compared to the others is the concentration, is the number. You have one or two members of fraternities in other parties. As soon as it was known, they were excluded from the parties. You have 40 to 50% of parliament members of the Freedom Party, and they are not excluded from their party. So there is a big difference in that. Secondly, and I want to repeat in a different way what Dan has said before, my generation was formed by the Six-Day War. We were sitting on our radios the first day of the war and listening, Israel is practically gone, the Egyptians are in Tel Aviv, the Syrians have occupied Haifa, and so on and so on. We didn't really know what was going on, and we thought it's another Holocaust. People like me were formed by this, and we will never forget this moment 2 days or 1 day later when we found out that the other thing happened. And we swore to each that we will not let it happen again. And this is the base of our understanding, even so we, under quotation mark, still live in Europe. Which means we have to explain to ourselves why our parents came back. There is no real explanation except coincidence or whatever, or the meat pots of Egypt. But at the end of the day, we are all in problems with this. Those who are proud Jews cannot explain to themselves why are we living in the Galut. On the other hand, the lady who was speaking about security, with all due respect, and I really live here and I go to Jerusalem, but in the 60s and 70s, I was running about in Jerusalem. I have a home in Jerusalem. I was in the shuk and wherever, day in, day out. Today, I'm not going there. I'm afraid. So, or at least I don't go there with my grandchildren. I go there alone. So things have changed here too. Don't tell us that everything is fine and everything is secure. There's been terrorism against the Jewish people in Europe. As a result, the Jewish people in Europe today are better protected than anybody else. Our schools and our synagogues are fortresses. In front of our school in Vienna, you have 17 security guards all around. The Israeli embassy is not as secure as our school in Vienna. So things have changed. There has been much less terrorist attacks against Jews over the last 2-3 years than there has been, unfortunately, attacks here. Where are we more secure? We are not secure anywhere. But we have to keep our values, the democracy here and the values there.
Thank you. Shlomo, please.
Let me start with a point of pride about Israel, which I think has been lost in some of the debates here. One of the reasons why many of us in Israel are very proud about Israel and its democracy is because of an unusual situation. For 70 years, Israel has been at war in one way or another against not all the Arab world, but Arab countries, Palestinian terrorism, etc., etc. But we were able to maintain, under difficult conditions, not an ideal situation for Israeli Arabs, it's not ideal, but no other country has been at war for 70 years and maintained the civil rights and human rights and equality and political representation of a minority, which at least on the cultural level identifies with the other side, not politically. So this is a very great thing. And one of the reasons why Israel is getting a lot of support from democratic countries is because of that. We know what Americans did in World War II to people who were either Japanese or of Japanese origin. So they put them in concentration camps. I mean, Israel can speak with pride when we are being told some of the problems, and there are problems. An Arab-Israeli writer, poet, in the 1956 war, wrote a very moving poem in Arabic and in Hebrew, in which he said, "My country is at war with my people." My country, Israel, because he viewed himself as an Israeli, is at war with my people. He viewed himself as member of the Arab people. Not an easy situation. So despite the fact that some of the Arab members of the Knesset are doing things which in no other democratic country would have been tolerated, we are very proud that we are tolerating it because we are strong. We should remember that. Having said that, and I want to relate to the Austrian situation, modern Zionism under Herzl started precisely from the type of people who had fraternities which didn't allow Jews, etc., etc. Exactly. So there is a myth that Herzl started being a Zionist because of Dreyfus. This happened later. It was because of what happened in Austria. And because Herzl was aware of what happened in Austria, he, in his utopian novel Alt Neuland, Old New Land, which suggested how a Jewish state would look in the year 1923, he wrote it in 1903, described an election campaign in a Jewish state in 1923 in which there is an emergence of a Jewish racist, whereby Dr. Geyer, you know what Geyer means, Geyer is a vulture, who set up a Jewish party, which was a Jewish racist party, which was really, in a way, a mirror image of the anti-Semitic party of Lueger in Vienna. And the fact that Lueger was elected democratically as mayor of Vienna suggested to Herzl that democracy is not always the only and the secure guarantee against racism and populism, and we see it happening today. And this is why we should remain, that when you listen carefully to parties like Alternative für Deutschland, when we have now a problem with Poland regarding the memory of the Holocaust, but on the 8th of November last year, there were mass demonstrations in Warsaw which called for keeping Poland white. It wasn't just against Jews, it was against Jews, which supposedly were not white. That's fine, I have no problem with that, but it was against Arabs and Muslims. So I want to say very gently to our friends in Europe, we should be concerned about anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism is a member of a family, which is a family of racism. Let us not have illusions. If, despite the fact that there is Islamic fundamentalism and Islamic terrorism, and we should fight against it as we should fight against any sort of terrorism, no problem about that. But let's have no illusions. If Muslim people will not be secure in Europe, Jews will ultimately not be secure in Europe. It's not an easy statement to make, but we should be aware of it. And therefore, just as in France, there are organizations like SOS Racism and others which have Jews and Muslims fighting against Le Pen. Something like this is very important for our Jewish values, for our human universal values, and for the future of Jews in Europe and the support for Israel. Thank you very much.
Yes, please. Could you bring a mic to this gentleman here? Is there a microphone around?
Yeah, thank you.
Here it is, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Velor Engel. I'm from Latvia and partly from Russia. And I want to ask one question. By my understanding, Israel afraid to change the good relationship with such countries of the former Soviet Union like Latvia, like the Baltic states, like Ukraine, because I don't see any reaction to the glorification of the executors in these countries. I mean, the law about the glorification of Bandera in Ukraine. I mean about a situation with the glorification of Waffen-SS in Baltics. And my personal experience of the conversation with the ambassador of Israel in Latvia, for example, I understood that they didn't want to, they want to be good for these countries because of the high politics and so on. By my understanding, the situation in Ukraine is not better than the situation in Poland now, because it is absolutely the same. But it was absolutely different reaction of the Israeli government to these two situations. Could you comment?
Yes, please. I'll collect one or two more questions.
May I make a comment? I hope just a comment. This is a very good question, and I hope the Prime Minister of Israel, who is also the Foreign Minister, will have a good answer for it. I do not have. Let me done, since this was a response to a gentle suggestions I made, I stand by my suggestion, and let me suggest something else. anti-Semitism is also about politics. What is it if not about politics, about values, about if you're anti-Semite that you want to exclude Jews from political rights, you're dealing with politics. So I understand the problem that you're raising, but I think if we want to have support outside the Jewish community and within the Jewish community in our fight against anti-Semitism, we have also to look beyond our own self-interest and to our values, and the Jewish values are universal values. And therefore, I stand by my suggestion that the organizers consider the change. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Please, could the mic be in?
May I?
Okay, we go ahead and then you. Yes, please.
Dave Rich from the Community Security Trust in the UK. I completely agree that anti-Semitism is part of a family of racisms, and that if other minorities, including Muslim minorities in Europe, are not safe, then Jews ultimately will not be safe, because this is about a type of politics. But we have a problem, because there are people and organizations on the left in Europe who identify as anti-racist, who do not agree that anti-Semitism is an equal part of this family of racisms, and that Jewish people and Jewish communities need to be defended alongside other communities. So how do we reach a point where Jewish communities in Europe continue to oppose the far right, as we always have, and to defend our fellow minorities, and those minorities and the broader anti-racist left will recognize the kind of anti-Semitism that threatens our communities today and actually help defend Jewish communities against it?
Yes, thank you. Could you bring the mic here, please?
Yeah, I have one. My name is Alan Shatter. I'm a former Minister for Justice and Defence in the Irish government. I want to congratulate the Department of Foreign Affairs here for this conference. I think we're having a very important and interesting discussion, and the key to it in the context of how governments behave and in the context of anti-Semitism, the position of the Israeli government. This isn't a simple issue. Anyone who's ever been in government knows that there are moments in time where there's conflicts between values and interests, and you try and align your interests with your values as best you can and make the impact you can to uphold values that are very, very important. But in the context of our discussion today, firstly, Shlomo, I agree entirely with you. I think to suggest that racism is a matter of politics and anti-Semitism is not, is nonsense. If anything, we learned with the Holocaust and with what happened in Europe in the 1930s, anti-Semitism is very serious politics, and it's used as a mechanism to gain political power, to retain it, and to murder people. So we should never be under an illusion that there's some separation between anti-Semitism and racism. Anti-Semitism is a form of racism, and you can't distinguish between the two. But could I just come to another elephant in the room that I'm somewhat surprised no one has raised yet? There's a reasonable possibility that in the next few years, the current American President, Donald Trump, might be perceived as the US president who was the greatest friend of Israel. He also might be perceived as the worst ever president of the United States, who laid down the foundation for racism in the United States, who made racism respectable, and as someone who was supportive of Israel, was blind to anti-Semitism on occasion in his own country. I don't adopt the approach of some that everything that Trump does or says is evil. It isn't. And he has been supportive of Jewish communities and Jewish events in the United States and said some very important things. But he's the same president who equated Nazis on the street in Charleston with those who are opposing Nazism in Charleston. And this is where the Israeli government has a problem. And I'm very interested, I don't express my view on this, but we have two distinguished speakers here. When it comes to interests and values, Israel is in an extraordinarily difficult position in dealing with the current administration in the United States. I'd be very interested, Chairman, in the views of our two speakers on that particular issue. I think everyone in this room is familiar with the approach of the Trump administration to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and equally familiar with what I would describe as the most chaotic American administration I've seen in my lifetime.
Before we continue, I thought of what you said, sir. The only way to explain why I think this was not raised to this minute, what you said and what many of us feel, is that the topic that was to be discussed here was European right-wing parties. And as far as I remember, Trump is many things, he's not European. And I have a feeling that what you said, I don't want to go into it because it's a different topic, but I think the Jewish community in America, a large part, 80% of it, would find it very difficult. And what you say now is a problem that we have with the Jewish community, and maybe another session will be devoted to it. If we speak, you will hear from me things that are not very different from what you just said. We have never seen anything like it in the past, but we cannot discuss. I'm not supposed to discuss it here in the European context. Yes, please. In a minute. There was somebody here. 5 minutes. So in a minute. Go ahead. Give the mic there, please. We have 2 more questions, and we finish with that. So in a minute. 2 minutes. There's a lot of people here. Sorry. Okay. Wait for the mic. Without the mic, you are not well heard here. Yes.
My name is Asher Cohen, and I'm a Holocaust survivor from Romania. My childhood, or better said, the lost childhood I experienced in Romania. I know what is anti-Semitism, Romanian anti-Semitism. I know what is the Holocaust. Most of my family were killed by the Germans and the Romanian collaborators in Transnistria. Nevertheless, I decided the last years in my public activities to promote a relationship with the new generation of Germany and others, because I believe that doing this we can make something for not repeating this kind of anti-Semitism in Romania. I lectured about anti-Semitism in Germany. I was invited. And what I wanted to say, for me, this participation is very personal, very important, the fight against anti-Semitism. But don't forget, we don't have to forget that we have many friends in Europe, in Germany. I have personal good friends in Germany, that they fight together with us against this kind of phenomena of anti-Semitism. And in this convention, we have to see the other part of this picture, not only what is going on. We are not alone in Europe. As we say in Hebrew, Am levadat yishkon. No, we are not alone. We have a lot of friends in Europe and elsewhere, and we have to, and many of their representatives are here in this convention. We have to mention this fact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do apologize to all those many people who wanted to speak and could not have because we have limited time. I'd ask the people on the podium here to make their final remarks, and we'll think a lot of what we've heard here today. Please, Ariel, and then Shlomo.
Yes, we have a lot of friends, and because we are just 1.5 million, we have also to build coalitions. So in Europe, we are building coalitions with politicians, with churches, with NGOs, with many groups who feel alike when it comes to fight for values. And this again is the reason why we have to make a clear distinction between those who are our friends because they uphold these values and those who are not. That's number one. Number two, we are very successfully fighting against what Natan Sharanksy called the 3Ds. You all have heard that IRA has adopted finally, after a long fight, the definition of anti-Semitism. The European Parliament, after a long fight with a big majority, has adopted the definition. And we are now I think, 8 European countries, including Austria, who have adopted the definition. And there are a lot of colleagues here. I've seen Andy Baker and Dryden and others who are now pushing to have 20, 30, 40 European governments and parliaments to adopt the definition, which means it's not black, it's not white, it's gray. We are somewhere in the middle. But our job when we come here is A, to share these informations, B, to get the support of the Israeli government. And I take Minister Bennett by his words yesterday. It's big time that the Israeli government starts supporting the fading small communities in Europe. We are nearly before extinction as communities. You have 50% of European Jewish communities who will not exist as communities in 20, 30 years from now. Which means listen to us, help us, work with us, and you can be assured that the European Jewish communities will support Israel as much as they can in wherever they can. So we are doing our homework. Please, State of Israel, Government of Israel, do yours.
Thank you. Shlomo, please.
Very briefly, it was mentioned that sometimes it's not very easy to create coalitions with Muslim organizations or left-wing organizations because they are also anti-Israeli, and this is true. But I think, since this was raised, in the case of England, Britain, you have now a Muslim mayor of London who is obviously a very good ally in fight against anti-Semitism and against criticism of Israel and also against racism. So one has to look for those allies, and I think they can be found. It was mentioned that the Trump presidency is not an easy challenge for Jews and for Israelis, and we do not know where it will go. Let me suggest something. If what I'm going to say now will not happen, forget that I said it. But if it will happen, please quote me. I'm not sure that President Trump will last 3 years in the White House. This is a very serious possibility, whether you like it or not like it, and I suggest that those who think that Trump is the best friend of the Jewish people should take it into account as an option. And last point, as an Israeli citizen and as a voter, I'm not going to tell you for whom I voted, but that's none of your business. You can guess that I did not vote for Netanyahu. Okay, that's fair enough. My criterion as an Israeli citizen is that I would like to be proud of my prime minister, of my government, and of my country. And I would like to be proud of the position that the Israeli government is taking on issues which are issues of Jewish concern, of universal concern, and of human and moral concern. Basically, I think we could have been proud for the last 70 years for this. I hope this will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to my friends here in the panel, to Shlomo Avineri and to Ariel Muzicant. Let me try to conclude by the short remarks as follows. Now we gather here, all of us have, I think, one interest, seeing the danger that was shown to us here in Austria and other places. We should not and cannot look away. Try to lessons from history should guide us, and we try to do it together because we have a common cause. If you think historically, not just on today, we gather here in the Jewish state of Israel, a strong nation that was built, among other things, as an understanding, because of understanding of what Europe became to the Jews. Unfortunately, we followed this success of us, huge success, is followed by an awful failure of the Zionist movement. Don't forget, Herzl, Nordau, and others initiated the Zionist movement to save European Jewry. And we failed. We had the state 10 years too late. Had we had it in 1938, there wouldn't be a Holocaust. But Jews had nowhere to run away. In European Jewry, the core of Zionism disappeared. So after this tragic failure with which we live all our lives,
We are here with the greatest success in Jewish history. In 70 or 80 years, from the lowest point of weakness, of no force or power at all, only justice, we learn that we need to be strong. Justice is not enough. And we built strength, power in many ways, reaching now, 80 years later, I think the highest point of strength of the Jewish people ever in history, in terms of the number of Jews living in this country, of the political, military, economic, scientific, social power. But let us not forget the two ingredients here. Without power, you are dead in this world, and nobody learned it more than the Jews. Justice enough will not do it for you. But power alone, without justice, is dangerous. And we need to remember the just cause of Zionism and to defend the justice of our cause. And our behavior in the case of racism, including, of course, antisemitism directed at us, is one major test of us keeping our just cause. It's not just to do good to us, it's to do the right thing for humanity. And we have been and can still be the lighthouse, the torch that is raised high for justice with strength. Not naivete, no, but values and interests together in fighting the new elements of European extreme right, anti-Semitic and racist phenomena is what we are discussing here. So thank all of you for your contribution. Thank the panelists, and let's all meet in Jerusalem as Israeli citizens soon enough.